Hi everyone. Welcome to the panel. Um, there is a benign assumption that adoption is always a happily ever after story. Often simply portrayed in the media, adoption is a complex issue where all parties' experiences need to be voiced. But why don't we ever hear the voices of adoptees in the media? The fourth upcoming panel will be looking at the politics and the power dynamics of the intercountry adoption system in Australia. But today, in this third panel, questioning the sustainability of the concept of adoption, exclusively only country adoptees will be given the chance to openly voice their criticism and expose their reality. I'd like to welcome Lunel Long, an adoptee from Vietnam.
Hi.
I've presented your camera, so here she is. Amy Jung, an adoptee from South Korea.
Hi, Ron.
We've got Dr. Jessica Walton, also an adoptee from South Korea. I have Anna Davison, an adoptee from Hong Kong. Hi. And Jai Wambi, whose camera is not working right now because we're at the hospital at the moment. We're having a very weak Wi-Fi. Hi, Jai.
Hi everyone.
And Tara Davis, an adoptee from Bangladesh.
Hi everyone.
Okay. So I apologize because it seems that my internet connection is bad. So I will start with this first question. So racism towards intercountry adoptees who are brought into Australia is a common phenomenon. Dr. Jessica Walton, you are a social cultural anthropologist who has done research in this particular sphere. You're yourself an adoptee who has lived with racism. Why is it important to address the issue of racism in the context of adoption?
Okay, thanks. Yes, so I'm a Korean adoptee. I was adopted to the US in Virginia, and I was adopted to initially a fairly diverse area, but when I was in second grade, my family moved to a much less diverse area where I had a common experience that a lot of adoptees have, where I was like the only Asian in the village. So it felt like that, especially at school. So for this talk, I'll just talk briefly about some of my experiences of both blatant and subtle forms of racism, and then I'll talk about some of approaches that are unhelpful, and then some strategies that are useful for adoptive parents to use and think about. So an example of blatant racism for me was when I was in second grade and I received all of the usual sort of name calling and slurs and pulling at the eyes, and it was a fairly traumatic experience for me, which still impacts me as an adult when I experience racism unexpectedly in everyday circumstances. That all comes back to me as a memory. And so just to give you an idea what that was like, it started on my first day of school, and I was not only the new kid, but I was also the new Asian kid. And so I would receive this all the time, including spitting and blowing in my ears and various other lovely interactions. And so I'd come home crying every day. And, you know, it was obviously upsetting to my parents, but more upsetting for me, much more obviously. And they didn't know how to handle that. Their strategy for me was just ignore it. You're a better person than that. don't engage. And so I tried that, and it didn't work. It clearly did not work. Silence and ignoring the silence those kids continuing to um, act that way towards me. And so that was unhelpful. And then a more, I guess, subtle example of racism was when I was a teenager. And occasionally my family would go out to a restaurant. And my family includes two white parents and two biological children to them. So I was also the only Asian in my family. And we would go to a restaurant, and the person who was introducing us or taking us to our table would assume that it was just a family of four. And so my parents would have to explain to them that no, we're a family of five. And so while it might seem like a mistake, and the person might be or have that intention of making me feel bad, but it's that broader systemic issue of implicit bias and assumptions that people have, in this case, perceived ideas of family belonging. So I think I just want to communicate that these experiences, while they might be experienced on an interpersonal level and might be seen as isolated incidents, actually build up and accumulate, and there's research about everyday racism that's well documented about the cumulative effects of this. So going on to what's unhelpful, I've mentioned it before that silence and ignorance is not helpful, and one of the common things that adoptive parents tend to use, if they're not aware, is thinking that colorblindness is the best approach, or just ignore race because it doesn't matter. But it clearly does matter, and it has social significance. So it's something that people really need to have open conversations about and realize that racism occurs by good people and bad people. It's not about being good or bad. So just wanted to emphasize that. And the fact that adoptees really need those skills and knowledge to be able to make an informed decision. So a lot of the research on bystander anti-racism says that you do have to make a pretty clear decision about how you want to act and the potential repercussions of that. But the importance is having that ability to make that decision. And importantly, it's not just about cultural knowledge building, going to culture camps. It's also, and more importantly, about racism, I would argue. So why is it important? From my personal experience, it had huge social and health impacts on me, which continue to impact my confidence and self-esteem as an adult. And there have been systematic reviews of the literature, not just for adoptees, but people of different ethnic minority groups, that racism over time results in anxiety, hypervigilance, so you might expect that to happen again and again, so you're really on edge all the time, high blood pressure, low self-esteem, depression, and those sorts of things, as well as internal racism. So I definitely experienced that as real feeling that the only thing that defined my Asian and Korean identity was as a negative thing. So that happens. So just to finish, some takeaway messages. Important to be open and talk about racism in age-appropriate ways from an early age. It's important not to get defensive when having these discussions. And also it's important to educate yourself and take that initiative and not just rely on adoptees to educate everyone, because that can relive emotional trauma, having to repeat that again and again. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Now we're going to move on to Jai. Most of children placed into adoptions are from families who are suffering from a combination of factors, usually from poverty and social stigma. Jai, you were adopted out 22 years ago from Sri Lanka. Your birth mother surrendered you to adoption to give you a better life. What was your Sri Lankan mother going through when she had to give you away? Jai, I've muted you. I'm just going to unmute you for the second. It won't be too long. So we don't hear you at the moment, and now I believe we've unmuted you. So. Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, great. So thanks, everyone. Okay, basically, just a bit of background on my adoption. I was born nearly 23 years ago now. I was adopted out at 6 months old. Basically, the history of what I was brought into, very fortunate enough to actually be able to meet my birth mother at my 21st birthday. Not on the day, but she came out for the occasion, which was lovely. Basically, my birth mother, she followed her heart rather than her religion. She was a Catholic. She married out of her religion into a Buddhist family, in whom she had a son who is my half brother, and he's 3 years older than me. Unfortunately, her then husband and my half brother's father got killed due to circumstances that were not of his choice. Obviously, in a very third world country, you're relying on basically the father and your husband to provide everything for you, and obviously, when you get that taken away from you, you've got nothing. The issue with that is, and some people would assume that, oh, why can't you just go back to your family? 14 children. In which only 3 of her sisters, because there's only 4 girls in the family, so all her sisters basically were able to turn around and say, okay, we're going to just help you, because obviously you've gone through a very rough patch, but the problem is the rest of her family, parents and all her brothers, kicked her out of the family because she had married out of the religion. Is having a young child and no money coming in, she had, for her, nothing. So unfortunately, one of my half brother's dad's friends, who's my dad, took my mother in and my half brother, gave them food, gave them a home, and then obviously things happened and got her pregnant as well. Gave her the choice of either staying and aborting the child, being myself, or being kicked out and keeping the child. So she chose her own family and blood over someone who could just give her money, which is very, very good of her to do. But there again, she still had no family to go back to. And the problem was, if her family found out that she was having a child from someone, she's a huge shame upon her, more so than what she already has now. So basically, what we have to do, when I first found out about all these situations, going through what, she had nothing. So she had to give my half brother to one of her sisters, and then basically when I was born, within 2 weeks I was put straight to a foster home. So she basically had to start from the very start again, from the beginning. She had no money, she had no family that could help her, because the sister that she gave my half brother to was already looking after 2 of her own children and her husband as well. So I guess what most affected her was, because she was actually following her heart rather than her religion, it basically ruined her life. But in saying that, it's really turned around in her, because she's doing very well for herself now. She's got herself a new husband. My half brother's now married as well. They've both got houses, they've both got cars, they've both done very well for themselves. I guess the importance for me as well for reconnecting to my birth mother, and even I guess the differences that I had to face, was firstly the language. Because when I first met them about 6 or 7 years ago, and that was via Skype, my half-brother didn't know any English at all, and my birth mother didn't really know much. So that would have been the only issue, but since then they have worked on it and actually taken English classes to be able to speak to me, because I can't speak Sinhalese, for my life. But it was really important just actually reconnecting on everything that had been presented to me, and I'm very thankful for everything that she's done, and given me the life that I truly did deserve. So thank you. I think that's about it, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Jai, very much for sharing your story. There's a lot of elements here of social economical realities for your own mother, and also all those those hard challenges into reconnecting. So talking about reunion, Anna Davison also is going through her reunion. It's been many years, and there's ups and downs. So the reunion between birth parents and adoptees can be quite challenging for numerous reasons. Anna Davison, you first reunited with your birth family in Hong Kong 20 years ago. You are still
Yeah.
going through many social, economical, and cultural hurdles. Can you describe the challenges in your reunification?
Okay, the challenges I faced when I reunited my birth mother was cultural differences, such as she wanted to feed me with her chopsticks, which I had a panic attack about. They had also the expectation that in the Chinese culture that they would ask the young people for money, and this is what she also did to me. But in Hong Kong, you have to be over the age of 21 to actually search through there, and if you're not that age, you have to actually get permission from your adoptive parents and a supporting letter from yourself, and then to present to the Hong Kong government. But during that process, it only took me 4 weeks to actually reconnect with my family in Hong Kong, which was great. I also found that I've got grandparents which have recently passed away. I've got cousins, aunts, uncles, sisters, and brothers, and of course my birth mother, which I don't have much communication with due to culture and language skills issues. When I was in Hong Kong about 10, 15 years ago, I met her for a birthday dinner, and she said at my reunion that she always remembered when my birthday was, but when we went out for dinner that night, she said, "Why are we going for dinner?" And I said, "Well, it's my birthday," and she had totally forgot about my birthday altogether, which was quite hurtful for me. At that same time, in the next week or two, she asked me for $50,000 Hong Kong. This is the person who's never finished school and never had a job, so I didn't know where to get that money from or who to ask my money for. Only recently, in about the last 2 years, I've been wanting to reconnect with her, so I'm trying to compose a letter in my head on what to say to her and what not to say to her, because I had many restrictions from my family on how much contact I had with her and how much information do I give her, because my family still live and work in Hong Kong. In 1997, I went back to Hong Kong for the handover, and that was when my Australian parents and my brothers from Australia were also in Hong Kong, and they met my family, my birth family there. That's basically it for me.
So, why is it important for you to reconnect, Anna, with?
I initially reconnected in Hong Kong for health reasons, but when I was about 14, 15, I was having identity crisis issues because I was living in Hong Kong, but I didn't know if I was an Australian or a Chinese person because I was living as an expat because my parents moved to Hong Kong. My dad's been there for 42 years now, living in Hong Kong and working there. Um, I lived as an expat on the Peak, so I don't know if you know where the Peak is, but it was a government servant, government quarters, very well-off parents then, and now he's moved across to private practice, and he's still working in Hong Kong, and my brother is still working in Hong Kong too with his family. The identity crisis has only stopped for me in the last 4 or 5 years, because since I've gone back to Hong Kong, I've started to belong in Hong Kong and feel like the people of Hong Kong have accepted me.
And
Yeah, it was.
do you find that there's some answers into this search for yourself?
I do feel I belong a bit more in Hong Kong, and it brought me close to the Hong Kong people, and I actually can identify with them and understand them. As my birth mother was only 14 when she had me, so I don't know who my birth father was at the time.
Mhm. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing your story, Anna. We'll move on to Tara, who had a completely different experience into adoption. We don't always hear the voices of adoptees who had a full integration with their adoptive family and who had no identity issues. Tara Davis, you were adopted out from Bangladesh and never felt any urge into discovering your culture of origin nor into meeting your birth family. Did you always feel like you belonged to Australia? So Tara, sorry, I muted you, so sorry, I'm just going to remove that. It won't be too
Yep.
long. So, yeah, your sound works now.
Yeah, I've been here I was adopted when I was 11 months old from Bangladesh. So, and I have not. I feel that I have fully integrated within Australia. I have a sister who was also adopted from Bangladesh. She's, however, not my biological sister. And I know that she has a similar, well, I think she has a similar outlook on that she's not interested. I don't even have any desire to go back to Bangladesh. Well, I know for myself, I wasn't told the information that we had because we were both from orphanages. So the records that were at the orphanages were the only records, which was, well, I think there was 4 documents with 4 different spellings of a name, whether it was a last name or a first name for myself. So to even find that it's a difficult starting point, and apparently it was a common name as well. So I guess we were told that there was probably 0 chance or minimal chance of even being able to find your family if you wanted to. So I guess knowing that from a young age, it was just sort of get on with it. And so I did, and I grew up in a small community in Tasmania, which, I mean, of all the places, Tasmania is probably quite very multicultural, let's say. But I have honestly can say that I have never experienced racism growing up in Hobart. However, that did change when I moved to Launceston, which is at the other end of the state, and it's a much smaller place. But again, that was quite mild in comparison, and I think just a reaction to whatever's going on politically at the time. So for me, I feel that, yeah, I guess quite happy with my life and feel like I belong within my family, my adopted family. I don't feel any other way. So yeah.
Excellent. And did you ever discuss about adoption with your adoptive parents?
It was discussed quite regularly because my sister and myself were clearly quite physically looking different to our Australian family. So there was also biological children as well. It certainly wasn't ever brushed under the carpet. And my biological mother, my adopted mother, would always have things around related to Bangladesh. However, my sister and I just weren't interested.
Fair enough. That's a fair call as well. So that's actually a very nice story. Okay, we'll move on to Amy. Amy, you have lived a different story with adoption as well. You weren't placed in a family that was maybe not suitable for you. There's an assumption that every adoption always ends as a happy story. It is not always the case. Adoption placement can be a gamble. So Amy, you were adopted out from South Korea. How was your relationship with your adoptive parent? So sorry, I'm trying to remove the mute on your microphone, and it's doing it. Okay, now it's.
Yes. So I was relinquished at birth and then adopted from South Korea at 4 months. So from what I can tell, I think my parents looked quite great on paper, but the reality was actually quite different. So, you know, they were married, they both worked, and they were also they were members of the church, and they also had a biological daughter who's 15 years older than me. So it looked great, but my mother was actually very mentally ill. She had borderline personality disorder. But it wasn't diagnosed, and I guess, you know, the mental health has come a long way, and we only sort of really have realised this now, but she actually passed away due to her mental illness when I was 12. So, I mean, anyone who's encountered a personality disorder would know that life is incredibly unpredictable and erratic for everyone involved, not just the person. So, my adoptive parents fought a lot. It was an unpredictable environment. They were very physically and verbally violent. And then they divorced when I was 5. So during the divorce, my brother, who's also an adoptee, both of us spent some time in foster care. So, re-trauma, I guess. Not neither of us remember very much of that. But then both of my parents remarried as well. And due to Mum's health, both of us ended up living with my father and my stepmother. So, and at the time she was sick as well. So she had a very long ongoing battle with breast cancer. So we didn't see a lot of her for quite a while. But on her side, with her new husband, it was still that pattern of violence, very aggressive, and he is a very aggressive man as well. So we saw a lot during that time. And then when we were at home with Dad, it was a completely different story. There was just as little emotionality as possible, including sort of towards us. They were quite neglectful emotionally and physically. So yeah, we had a bit of difference on both sides. I also had a very hard time with my stepmother, who was also quite abusive towards me, and sort of in my father's way, he kind of did nothing to stop that. So currently, at the moment, I only speak with my brother. I'm not in contact with anybody else, and that's just been the most healthiest thing for me. So I guess from all of that, what I've sort of learned is when I tell my story to others, and I've sort of sat on a couple of panels that have included adoptive parents or potential adoptive parents, it always strikes me that they seem I guess everyone seems to think, oh, well, they'll do better, and clearly my parents, slipped through the cracks of being able to adopt children, and I guess obviously there are better parents out there. I mean, really, I hope there are. But I think despite her illness, my mother was the most loving person. She was the most genuine and kind and giving person that I knew. And I think, I think both of my parents still went into the adoption with the intention of doing well. They wanted children. And I think a lot of parents tell themselves, we want a child. There are children out there who live unfortunate lives, and let's give a child a better life and we'll love them and they'll never want for anything. So I don't think my parents are actually that different to any other potential adoptive parents or, current adoptive parents. And I think it's a little bit of a trap there where, no one's perfect. You can't predict what's going to happen. People divorce, there'll be new parents and people coming into a child's life. And, I'm sure there are amazing adoptive parents out there. And, I wish I had some. But I think for me, in closing and with my experience, it's important for people to realize that it's not just enough to want a child and then decide to adopt. You're not, like I wasn't an orphan. My biological parents are still together. They're married, and I have a full-blood brother and sister, and they're not wealthy, but they're also not poor, and they live quite a comfortable life. And so I think, I'm not pro-adoption or anti-adoption, but I think it's very important, to be able to realize that there are going to be personal battles that you can overcome in parenting as well, to then be able to parent an adoptive child well as well.
Thank you very much, Amy. It seems that with all of these different stories and experiences, we can see that adoption creates a lot of consequences on people's lives, and we need to consider every positive, negative, and everything in between, and tackle those problems. So, Linnell, you are concerned with those type of things. So, you are particularly concerned with dealing with those adoption issues through education support. What is your experience with adoption, and how could post-adoption support have been beneficial for you? So I'm just going to unmute your microphone in a second. It'll take a few seconds. And There you go.
Hi, yeah, my name's Linnell. I was adopted at 6 months of age by an Australian Caucasian family, and they had 4 biological children of their own. I was adopted in the 1970s, where there was very little pre-adoption support, so my parents had no idea that the child they were about to adopt should actually be considered special needs. People in those days had the illusion that if you adopted a baby, you consider it a blank slate. Loving it would be enough because experience, environment, and nurturing would overcome anything pre-verbal. Well, how wrong that proved for many of us. When I was adopted at 6 months old, it would have been really useful for my parents to receive assistance with navigation of professional services that could assist them. I turned out to be quite a sickly child. I hoarded food, I gorged it, I pooped it out, I had huge reactions to hives, I had bowel troubles, I had trouble bonding with males in particular, so that affected my dad big time. I had sleeping difficulties, I wet the bed to quite a late age, etc. So my parents really would have benefited from having medical and psychological advice from specialists who actually understood the issues that arise from a child being raised in an orphanage, even only for 6 months, as in my case, but also just because of the differences in the culture and the language and the environment. As I grew older and went to school, I experienced racism like many of us have had. I grew up in quite a remote regional area where I was the only non-white child apart from Aboriginal children. It would have been really helpful to have had some support in terms of devising strategies to deal with that racism, as opposed to me, in the end, I just internalised it. I developed low self-esteem, I hated my looks, I hated my race, I didn't want to belong to them. Even within my own family, I dealt with overt racism, with comments from adults saying negative things like, you know, the Asians taking over Australia, or talking about the Aboriginals and how they're such a lazy lot. My own family couldn't even see that I had different skin and looks. They were colourblind. It's like, even though I was so different to everyone else around me and every stranger would comment, but yet my family just couldn't see it. Prior to 10 years of age, I distinctly recall being quite sad about my biological family, that we were not together. And I realised in hindsight, in my late 20s, that it must have been me feeling very aware of my losses. But I'd never had anyone to explore these issues with, and so they just got pushed down until, you know, quite a later stage in my life where I could process that properly. But how beneficial it would have been if my family had have been made to be aware of the losses that adoptees begin with and start with. During my time in my family prior to young adulthood, it would have also been hugely beneficial for there to have been some kind of checkpoints by mental health professionals educated in intercountry adoption. For some of us, like me, who suffered some negative impacts of adoption, such as abuse or adoptive family breakdown, it's hugely important for the right professional support to be available and for funding to actually be able to access this support. I ended up having to go through a plethora of professionals myself, funded purely by myself when I was actually able to afford it. And, you know, eventually I found the one who was actually able to help me recover, but it took a long time to find the right professional. As I grew into young adulthood, it was a huge benefit to find support from other adoptees who had returned to their birth country as well. You know, I learned just how to set the right emotional expectations for my return trip, how to navigate around Vietnam, how to find the right contacts to go and visit an orphanage or to look for the carer who cared for me. And just to understand, you know, basic things like what are the cultural norms for the country. So, for example, I had no idea before I went on my trip that in Vietnam, 340 Australian dollars is their whole year's salary, you know, so it was quite important not to flash a lot of money around or to barter too much, you know, to take it into account as to, well, what's their value of money. When I first went back to Vietnam, it was quite an emotionally overwhelming trip. I did feel a connection to a place that I had absolutely no memory of, but it was an education to see the country for what it was rather than for what I had learnt from films in particular. So I still recall the shock and revulsion I felt for America after actually visiting the War Remnants Museum, where you see babies that are massively deformed who died before they were born or even after due to the effects of Agent Orange. And in contrast was the amazing friendliness of the foreigners, the amazing friendliness of the local Vietnamese to foreigners, you know, particularly to Americans, Australians who had actually been there fighting. And then I visited an orphanage and spent time with children who had deformities caused by Agent Orange, and I couldn't but help see the reality of what war had done and what its cost was to its children, particularly, including myself. So for me, the searching and reunion stage of our journey is where post-adoption supports are absolutely lacking in our country. How and where do we even start when we're dealing with third world countries? I came from the war, and so there was very little paper trail. And there's such a need for help in knowing how and where to access our orphanage information, for translation of those documents, and for translation, especially for those who actually do have the privilege of actually having a reunion. I have very little chance of reunion. I've actually attempted to search 3 to 4 times, but given there's very little post-adoption support in our country or in Vietnam, my options are very limited. So I can either do something radical like go and appear on national television and search for my mother, or I can take my chances with something like a DNA database. But, I guess the options are fairly slim. If I could find my birth family, I think I would. But not all adoptees have the same desire as we've seen on this panel. And for those who do, though, there is an absolute need for helping us to set realistic expectations of that reunion. There's the psychological and cultural support for afterwards, after we've had a reunion, because it's not all roses. And as we've seen with Anna talking, there are a lot of differences between the adoptee and the biological family, from expectations, values, religion, economic backgrounds, educational backgrounds, our culture and our language. They all divide us, and so there really is only that genetic link that ties us together. And lastly, I just wanted to mention the need for further research, training and networking of our professionals in this country on intercountry adoption. Currently we have no way of connecting all of the people who specialise in this area, and to leverage their knowledge and experience and utilise it for the benefit of guiding our legislation and our ongoing advocacy for support for families and adoptees coming into the country. We also have very little scientific research on the outcomes of the success of intercountry adoption versus other options, or for rates on the success or failure of adoptions and breakdowns in families. We have no database of mental health professionals that adoptees could access, or finances for, or somewhere where they can actually access finances to pay for those services. So these are the many issues that we have from a post-adoption perspective. To me, post-adoption is absolutely required at every stage of our development after we're adopted, and even prior to this, most important is the pre-adoption support, which is fundamental and should be given to our families. It makes a big difference. It should include extensive education on the medical issues that arise from the time spent in an orphanage, the psychological impacts of abandonment throughout the life cycle, the cultural impact of removing us from our country of origins. It also should cover topics such as racism, the subtle and overt, the bonding, testing behaviours, teenage years, of which we tend to have to experience it a little bit more complicated than the average non-adopted person. My belief is that, if pre-adoption and post-adoption support is done adequately, there should be less compounding of the issues for us adoptees as we grow up. And that's pretty much all I've got. Thanks.
Thanks enough, Linnell, for sharing everything that you just said. I think it is important with all the problems that we've just talked about, that there is that support, whether or not that adoption happens well or not. We need to recognize that sometimes it is not for the best. I'd like to ask a question to Ty now. I feel like there's a lot of people here that have been alienated by the fact that because of their physicality being different than the environment. But Jai's been a bit different. You've went the other way, complete other way, and embraced your difference. And you even have tattoos on your body. Can you tell us about how you lived racism, if you did live racism?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm hoping you guys can hear me, because now I'm still here at the hospital. Basically, with my experiences growing up, being and I'm very sorry, I can't actually remember who said it, but growing up, I think it was Jessica saying that you were the only to school with. Didn't they actually associate me with color? If someone said, "Oh, where's Jai?" They'd be like, "Oh, he's next to X or Y." He wouldn't be like, "Oh, that's the dark one." Oh, hold on a second. What have I done?
So Jai, I've cut your camera just now because it's cutting a lot.
Just cancelled it now.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Do you want me to start again, or?
Yeah, go ahead. Go again. We missed way too much.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So, when I was growing up in primary school, I was, as obviously everyone has seen me now, I am, dark. And growing up, I was the only dark one in my primary school for the first few years. It was really good for a lot of the kids who I went to school with because they didn't associate me with colour. They associated me with who I was, rather than, oh look, that's Jai over there, he's the dark one. They'd be like the one next to that person. So I guess for me personally, like embracing my colour, and a lot of the time, and this is perfectly honest with you all, I never always, I guess to make it easier on myself growing up and learning about my colour and being different in a white society, for me personally, and obviously this is not for everyone, and I fully don't condone it to be for everyone, I made it into a bit more fun, I guess. I accepted what I was and who I was, and you just kind of learn to run with it, and you learn to embrace what you are. I mean, when I was in high school, I always got like, oh, you're not black, you're always like the beautiful chocolate man, or come here, brown sugar. It's like, it's just a bit of fun for me. I never got any racism at all directly toward me, not saying that hey, I don't like you because you're this color. It's, I don't like you because you're a prick. And I'm not, but that's what people would say, obviously, for a bit of fun. So I guess for me, a lot of the time as well, on the inside, my adopted mum is a Kiwi, and she was born, bred in New Zealand, lived out here for most of her life. Now I've married my dad, who is a white Sri Lankan. My mum's blonde with curly hair, my dad's 6'2" and white as anything. And then you got me, short, stubby, and not white at all. And I don't know. Actually, you guys wouldn't have seen my arms because I'm wearing a t-shirt today. But I've actually got 2 sleeves full of tribal tattoos, which are both arms custom done due to my beliefs and thoughts and respect for my. Now, this is me talking honestly. I truly believe I'm half a Kiwi or half a New Zealander, because that's what I've been. I'm a full Kiwi. We used to go back every year and see my grandmother, and we used to go my other family, my aunties, my uncles and cousins and whatever else, and really, really, the New Zealand heritage and the New Zealand culture and way of life is just so relaxing and so easygoing that I felt that I really fitted in, which obviously I've expressed through ink on my skin, and now I'm up to number 8, I think, my tattoo. And if I could show you, I would definitely do that. I would show you that I actually have a Sinhalese word as well. I've got my birth name, which is Roshan, Roshan, written in Sinhalese, tattooed on my left bicep, which was actually written by my birth mother when she came out for my 21st. I actually got her to handwrite it and got them to copy it onto my arm when that was ready to be tattooed on me.
Yeah.
So,
thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Guy. It's super interesting that you've went the complete other side and completely embraced the culture of your adoptive parents, and assimilated into that and into your own identity. Amy, how did you assimilate into your adoptive parents' family, if you did or not?
I think that was really interesting, Jai. I really sort of related when you were saying how you sort of laughed a bit and said, like, I truly think that I'm, half Kiwi. And I think that's really true for most of us because you come here, my parents were white too, and you grow up you're in Australia, you're not, I'm not in Korea, you're not in your own culture. So, of course, the only culture you grow up knowing is Australian or Kiwi or whatnot. And so it's actually, I always find it really surprising, not so much now, but when I was younger, whenever someone would say something to me that would draw attention to the fact that I wasn't Australian, I wasn't blonde-haired and blue-eyed, it would almost shock you. You'd freak out in a way because you truly believe you are Australian. And the thing is, you are actually Australian. You, Jai, are actually Kiwi. And so, even little things like in the last few weeks, when South Korea were playing Australia in the AFC soccer, and actually 2 friends said something to me about, how do I think my team is going to go? And they weren't referring to Australia, they were referring to South Korea. And it puts you off, and you sort of think, well, why would I be, not that I'm not proud of the South Korean team, of course, because, I'm proud of being Korean, but, my identity is Australian, so, my team would be Australia. And so it's those sort of things too. So, yeah, I really, I relate to that because we're not the culture that we came from, we're the culture that we grew up in. So it's quite confusing, but yeah, no, I completely relate to that for sure.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I can also very much relate to that, and I think for me, that's what's really shocking when you experience racism, because you're like, oh, what Asian person? Oh, I guess that's me. So it can be really disruptive to your sense of self, and I think because, it's kind of ridiculous to think that we'd have any other identity to the one that we've been socialized into, and yeah, so I think that's really true, and it resonates with the adoptees that I've spoken to from my research, and so yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Jess. Sorry, I was on mute on that transition there. Sorry for the very abrupt transition. Linnell, did you want to add anything on that? And I'm just going to unmute you in a second. Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I guess I wanted to say was I too was so integrated into my culture of being Australian that in fact it took me a long time in my later adulthood to actually embrace my Asianness. Jay obviously embraced it from the start, which was amazing. And, I think that has a lot to do with whether our adoptive parents get that education to know the importance of incorporating culture, and then the other side is Tara, who, and I do suspect that you'll see more adoptees growing up these days where the adoptive parents are so much putting it in their face, like in Tara's case, that the adoptees will be going, but no, I'm sick of hearing all about my own culture from where I came from, as compared to, my generation where it was not even talked about and not even known to do. So, I think it's quite interesting to see all the different experiences and how much, we are able to incorporate both of our cultures from where we've come from and from where we now live.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to move on to a different topic now. I'd like to talk about the experience of returning home for the ones who did. I don't know if anyone wanted to start on that. I'm just going to mute everyone's microphone at this point in stage. If it gets too noisy, please help yourself and mute yourself. So, wait a second. All right, everyone's unmuted. Amy, do you want to talk about your experience into returning home?
Yeah, so I went back 2 years ago now. It was a really quick trip. It was, I still don't even know how to describe it when people ask me. I think they're expecting, a very joyous answer, but it's not that it wasn't joyous, but it was also it was a very emotionally hard visit. So we touched down in Seoul, and when the captain was saying, to all visitors welcome, and then to all returning Koreans welcome home, and I got quite emotional on the plane because it actually felt like a homecoming, and it was very odd. And then so we spent a couple of days in Seoul, and then went down to Busan, which is when I met my family for the first time. But being in the country alone, it was just a most amazing feeling. Like you could walk out the door and there was, a whole city full of people who looked like me, and that was really amazing. And I think, it was almost like living in a parallel universe for a week where, this is what my life could have been like. And then coming home was actually a bit of a rude shock, to be honest, to come back to Australia. And it brings up a lot of stuff that I think that I don't know if you could ever really be prepared for. So for me, it's really hard to describe. I'm glad I did it, and I'm really quite looking forward to going back to Korea. Not necessarily to see my family, but just to check it out a bit more. But yeah, it's I don't think I will ever actually be able to find the words to accurately describe how going home was.
Well, it's a bit different for me because I actually grew up in Hong Kong and spent half my life in Hong Kong. So it's very different for me on the experience of living in Hong Kong. And I didn't actually feel when I was growing up I belonged there, and I didn't feel I belonged here. So I had a big culture shock when I did come back to Australia. But every 3 years I have to go back to Hong Kong now for my citizenship to be the same there in Hong Kong.
Because your parents, Anna, adopted you via the expat route, so they were living already in Hong Kong, did they?
Yeah, that's correct. My dad was working in Hong Kong for the Hong Kong government when they adopted me in 1978.
And as you grew up, did you have any identity issues in growing in your environment in Hong Kong, but being raised by Australians?
I had a big issue with my cleaning lady. There was an incident when I was growing up in Hong Kong when I was about 14 where the cleaning lady had a fight with my mum about something in the house, and I went to agree with what my mum was saying, and the cleaning lady said to me the next day, "You shouldn't have to agree with her. She's not your real mother. She's not Chinese. You have to agree with me." And I found that quite hard to accept.
I see. I'd like to now talk about how searching for your identity affected the relationship that you have had with your adoptive parents and families. If that creates some issues with adoptive family. And how was it with you in the search?
It actually brought me closer to my family, and my adoptive parents were very supportive of me finding my birth mother, and also my brothers were very happy to find out they had Chinese grandparents. At one stage, they were running around the house saying we have Chinese grandparents and Chinese aunts and uncles, which was really nice. So I did appreciate my family accepting my birth family.
I'd like to ask that question to Jai because you mentioned that you knew another adoptee who had quite a bad of experience with that, where her adoptive parents felt as if she was being ungrateful or she was betraying her family for doing research.
Yeah, that's correct. So I won't name names because that's not what I would like to do. But my ex-partner, a couple of years before I met my current one, who's just not far off pushing out our first baby, my ex, she was adopted, grew up in a very upper class area of one of our coastal areas here in Victoria. I won't say where or who because it will, just I don't want to. Not that you might know them. It's just probably better not to. But when I was dating her, I already had my license and I was working full time, and she was still in high school but doing year 12, so she was on her last year of school. But I guess for her growing up, her parents yeah, they had quite a bit of money. And when I say quite a bit of money, we're looking at $30,000 plus a year on schooling, which is a huge amount of money. And obviously for her extracurricular activities such as dancing and singing and all that sort of stuff that girls not looking. But a lot of the time, her parents weren't happy with the fact that, she would ask them, oh, well, can we just look at the documents that I had been adopted with and, see if we can even look for, or even just try and make contact at all with my birth parents. And her parents like, well, no, because we've brought you into this life, we've raised you to what you are today. I don't understand why you would want to go back and meet them because you've got everything here. So they're actually quite blind to what she was actually intending to do. She wasn't trying to sabotage or their family, not at all. Like, that's completely not what she wanted to do. She just wanted to reconnect with her birth family. And it's actually, kind of weird to sort of say that I couldn't really talk about my own adoption around her because she was quite jealous of the fact that I was able to meet my birth mother and family and extended family, and that she will probably never have the chance to do that because her parents have given her very big hopes for her to do them proud, because a lot of the time, and unfortunately these days, they have a lot of expectations, and they basically say, well, we're putting you through this and we're paying X amount of dollars for it. We expect you to succeed and exceed what our expectations are. So for her, I do feel sorry for her in that aspect. I don't talk to her anymore due to circumstances that were really not necessary to be talking about today because
yeah, of course.
I guess to put it plainly, it's not really good, but that's where.
It's very interesting that she lived very different circumstances where she wasn't supported by her adoptive parents, but luckily you did, and it was beneficial for you to reconnect with your birth family. Linnell, how was? You don't have any paperwork, Linnell.
No, I don't. But I guess I was just going to say that, from my experience in, running Intercountry Adoptee support, it's interesting, the different types of families that you can get, where some adoptive parents are totally embracing, and from the word go, they are quite open to their child returning to their birth country, reunion with their birth family, whereas others, it's like they wanted to adopt because I guess, they didn't ever want to have to get to that hurdle, thinking that their child would just be happy with their identity as they've got it from adoption. I guess, it brought it home to me how uncomfortable it makes some parents when, for example, my parent, when I actually talk about in some, I did the recent article and had in there about the transaction of what was actually paid for me. And it was surprising to me at how uncomfortable that actually made my mother. But then I guess, I thought about it and I thought, well, that's actually not that unsurprising because, it would have to be a pretty open adoptive parent to be able to have a discussion with you about, well, exactly how much money was paid for me to actually allow my adoption, and for that to be an okay discussion, whereas I think a lot of us, we live our lives pretty much protecting our adoptive families from feeling any of that negative stereotype of, not being grateful or, and it's pretty much in our society expected that you don't talk about that kind of stuff because we're supposed to make adoption look wonderful, glossy, happy, and of course the reality is for an adopted child, you do think about these things. And it's a bit like how blatant it is about our race and our looks. We are totally look different, we feel different, but yet for the adoptive families that don't embrace that and allow you to talk about it, it ends up just becoming squished down in underneath all the rest of the stuff, and you eventually have to deal with it at some later stage. But it's far better if you can talk about it up front and be supportive up front and embrace it. So I guess that's just what I wanted to say about that bit.
Thanks, Neil. I'd like to add a little question to you again. Do you feel like the mainstream media, the adoption agencies, and the government are listening to the adoptees' voices and needs?
Well, I guess my little spiel before that I said was pretty much saying that, you know, I don't think adoptees' voices are heard enough, particularly when it comes to creating legislation, particularly when it comes to, you know, asking our society from an adoption point of view, like, you know, what are the needs of our group? And particularly in Australia at this point in time, I think we hear far too much from prospective adoptive parents, but not a lot from the existing population of adults like ourselves who are actually living the life of previous policies, and we also are the ones who are in need of the supports at the moment. And it's all great to be able to bring in all these babies who are, you know, wanting and needing homes and fulfilling, you know, the wishes of adoptive parents. But I think it's unethical to actually do that if you're not actually providing support for the families and for that child as they grow through their journey through life.
Thanks, Linnell. Thank you very much. I think it is time to conclude the panel. The 1 hour is up. So I'd like to thank everyone at home for listening to the stories of Intercountry Adoptees, and I hope you will consider the issues that were raised in this panel when you think next about adoption. I'd like also to thank all the panelists for sharing their personal stories. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And we'll see you on the next panel, where we will be looking at the politics and the power dynamics of the intercountry adoption system in Australia. Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, Gov. Bye.